So often, we only talk about the visuals in video games, the amazingly detailed worlds, the smoothness of the animation, the beauty of a game's aesthetic. And don't get me wrong, the level of graphics technology we have today is astounding and only seems to be getting better and better, faster and faster. But how engaging would video games be without sound? Today we're going to start a 4-part series looking at Overwatch and sound design in video games. I'm Victor Frost, and this is Behind the Screen. Roll the opener. Since we're going to be talking about video games, I figured I'd borrow the style of my favorite video game-centric educational YouTube channel, Extra Credits. Sort of an homage, but holy smokes is this hard. Getting everything ready to do this took ages. I couldn't imagine doing this every week. Not to mention the certain lack of, neckness. That took some getting used to. Anyways, we're here to talk about sound design, so let's get started with a quick refresher. Sound design is the process of choosing, making, or manipulating sound, and it comes in a lot of forms. Sappy music behind a romantic scene? Sound design. The sound of screeching tires in a movie? That's sound design too. The fact that I chose to use a different microphone than I usually use for this video? Sound design. It's the conscious creation, reconstruction, or alteration of a world through sound. That world being the diegetic world of the work. But why are we talking about sound design again? Well, 3 reasons. 1, because Overwatch does sound design really well, and as an audio engineer, I totally geeked out about it. 2, because Overwatch is popular and we want the views. Kidding. Well, sorta. And 3, because video games are in many ways different from TV and film and have different constraints and requirements that make them a fascinating medium when it comes to sound. Before we get into the differences though, let's look at how video games and movies use the principles of sound design in common. Like in any audiovisual medium, sound is often used to create a sense of reality. You can show a character walking across the road and audiences will understand that, but adding the sound of footsteps on asphalt reinforces that visual. It's subtle, but it makes the action seem more real. Sound is also used to convey information to the audience. You may not have seen the character walk into a deep puddle, but if you add the sound of soaking wet fabric to each footstep, you'll know his shoes are soaked through. And perhaps most obvious when watching a work, sound can be used to incite emotion. Adding a sprinkle of sad music will tell you that this guy he's had a bad day, and will encourage you to empathize with him. Where video games differ isn't in the principles themselves. Those same concepts, creating reality, conveying information, and inciting emotion, apply to any use of sound design. The difference lies in how those principles are implemented. Compared to movies, how diligent we are in how we use those concepts has to be cranked up to 11. Why? Well, to paraphrase Dan, video games as a medium is unique. It's an inherently interactive medium, one where the audience isn't merely audient, but participatory. When I finish editing this video, it's a completed work. It is as I made it, no more, no less, and you playing your part as an audience will never make it any different than what it is. But a video game without a player is fundamentally incomplete. Until you sit down and start playing, neither of us knows what your play session will sound like because, like conductors for orchestras, even within the confines of the piece you're going to play, each time you play will sound, in some way, different from the last or from any other player. That's just how video games play. They're like cover bands without a definitive original. So how do video games accomplish this? How do they have both a set sound design and allow the player's agency to be reflected in the mix? Well, rather than the mix being made beforehand and rendered into a single mix like in video, the soundscape in video games is generated on the fly for each player, based on what's going on in the game at any moment. This means that, in addition to the 3 sound design concepts we already have, we need to add 3 more concepts specifically for video games. First, the sound design for the game must be programmatic. In other words, it has to be robust enough to withstand the unpredictable nature of being called upon as needed without sounding out of place. This means that, as the complexity of the game's composition increases, so too must the sound design in order to be flexible enough to handle all of the different game states. A game like Pong would need, at most, 5 different sounds to cover every game state. Game start, ball hits paddle, ball hits wall, points scored, game over. Realistically, you could even condense those down to one sound for a few of those and still have a relatively good sound experience given the complexity of the game. A game like Final Fantasy, however, might have hundreds of different sounds because the space of the possible game states is that much bigger. Second, the sound design must be context sensitive. This, again, ties into the need to convey the game state to the player. If you're playing a racing game and your car pops a tire, what you shouldn't hear is the same tire sound you've been hearing before. It should switch to a sound that sounds like a popped tire flopping, or maybe a metal rim grinding against the tarmac. All of this is meant to convey information to the player, which brings us to the last of our new concepts. Number 3. The sound design in video games, by necessity, must be incredibly information dense. Now, you might think that the UI is the most information-dense aspect of the game, but remember, the user interface almost exclusively tells you about you, where the sound design can tell you about what's happening across the map. Especially in a fast-paced game with rapidly changing game states like Overwatch, the player needs to know immediately about changes in the world around them in order to know what to do next. Sound design in games takes away a lot of control from sound designers, but it's not without its charms. Instead of taking months or years crafting the sound design of a film from start to finish, the sounds of a game are set up to be played programmatically based on triggers in the game. For example, are you playing as Lucio and firing your gun? Play sound number 1432. Did you just take a hit as Zenyatta? Well, that's going to need sound number 1868, or maybe 1891. Done this way, the game engine can draw on a massive library of sounds and create the appropriate soundtrack for whatever situation the player is in automatically. There are thousands of sounds in the game for it to draw on, including all of the sound effects, dialogue, music, and Atmos. Atmos. Under most circumstances, to an audio engineer, Atmos is short for atmospheric sounds. These are the sounds that define the location of the scene, or, in a game's case, the level. Heavy machinery at Volskaya, the persistent city drone at King's Cross. But if you open up the audio section of the options menu in Overwatch, you'll see something called Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos is something totally different and very cool. Originally designed as a technology for movie theaters, it's been scaled down and implemented in Overwatch. Basically, the Atmos system can use some very complex math to give you a fully directional sound experience through standard stereo headphones. Theoretically, you could hear one of Widowmaker's shots whiz past your head. For more in-depth information about how Atmos was integrated into the game, you should check out the video Blizzard put out about it. Link in the doobly-doo. Well, I think that's a good stopping off point for now. Next episode, we're going to actually go into the game and start talking about how Overwatch uses sound design to convey the reality of the many locales in the game, as well as the characters that inhabit them. I'm Victor Frost, and I'll see you next time on Behind the Screen.